You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 165. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Matthew FitzSimmons. Simmons is the author of the best-selling Gibson Vaughn series, which includes The Short Drop and Poison Feather. His latest book, Constance, is a mind-bending thriller set in the near future that will be published on September 1st, but it's currently available for pre-order and as an Amazon First Reads. Constance is already a best-seller on Amazon. It's in the top 20 for the entire Amazon Kindle marketplace. I received an advance copy. Really enjoyed this book, so I highly recommend that you go check it out. But before we get to the interview, I wanted to let you know about Calytics, which provide powerful, data-driven genre reports. Calytics scours Amazon and crunches the data and turns it into very insightful, easy-to-read reports that provide data on category analysis, subcategories, common keywords, top authors in the genre book covers of the bestsellers, a list of the top 100 selling books, and a lot more. I've bought the Cozy Mystery, the Mystery Thrillers and Suspense reports, as well as the Serial Killer Thriller Report in the past, and have found them to be fascinating and insightful. And Alex is the brain behind the Calytics, has just released a genre report for Mystery Thriller and Suspense for 2021, as well as another report on Vigilante Justice for 2021. And so these reports are hot off the presses, and I just poured over these reports over this past weekend, and they're awesome. A lot of great information. Alex also provides a video seminar where he walks you through the whole process. Just literally takes you by the hand and walks you through the entire reports. So I highly recommend these reports. You can check it out at thrillingreads.com/report. I've been buying these reports now for the last 2 or 3 years. So I reached out to Alex, and he was kind enough to set me up as an affiliate because I think if you're a writer, you'll find these reports very useful. My interest, of course, is in the thriller genres, but Calytics has reports in all the other genres. So you can go check them out at thrillingreads.com/report. And any reports that you purchase through my affiliate link will go into supporting this podcast. So I appreciate that. So thank you very much. All right, here is my interview with Matthew FitzSimmons. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on today's show, I have Matthew FitzSimmons, who is the author of the best-selling Gibson Vaughn series, which includes The Short Drop and Poison Feather. And his latest book is Constance. And it's a mind-bending thriller in which a breakthrough in human cloning becomes one woman's waking nightmare. I received an advance copy, so thank you. I've been enjoying it. It's kind of creepy, so we'll get into that here in a little bit. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks so much for having me on.
So before we get into the book and everything, can you tell us a little bit about your background? What led you to now becoming writing these thrillers?
I think I always loved writing. I wrote my first piece in middle school. It was, we were given an assignment to write a 10-page short story, and I wrote a 60-page handwritten. I'm old enough that it was handwritten. And it was a Lord of the Rings ripoff with an elf and a Pegasus. And it was fantastic. I got an A on it, but I misspelled the title. The title was The Mage in Spirit, and I turned it in, and my teacher said, "What's this word?" And I went, "It's the Mage in Spirit." He said, "No, this is the Mage in Spurt." And my little 8th grade heart was broken, and I could not take even that much criticism. I didn't write another story for years after that. I was like, all right, well, I gave that a shot, and I'm done. And I spent the next number of years, actually sort of got involved in the theater, got very interested in being a theater director, and studied that in college, and then went to New York City afterwards, and interned at a theater called Playwrights Horizons on 42nd Street in off Broadway. I directed a couple of things, and then decided that it wasn't for me. And I was living with a playwright at the time, or an aspiring playwright. And I thought, my big problem with New York theater was I really liked the theater. I just didn't really like dealing with actors and actors' egos. And I had this really terrible epiphany was that, hey, writing books is just like directing a play. Only in books, the characters don't talk back to you. So that was sort of what got me back towards writing.
And so when you decided to write your first book, what was that process like? Did you were you able to publish it, or or how did that go through from the getting the idea to writing that first book?
So I started my first book in New York. The short answer is no, I did not publish it. I spent the better part of my 20s waiting tables, trying to write the great American novel, which my go-to joke is it turned out to be neither that great nor particularly American. And by the time I got done with it, I didn't really like writing anymore. It proved unsalable. I sort of had this like terrible feeling like, oh God, I've wasted my life. I have nothing to show for all of this work, and I need to get a job. I can't wait tables anymore. I took my shot and I missed. There are a lot. There are 1,000 of those stories. I took my shot and I missed, and I worked in the tech industry. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I worked in what was sort of the burgeoning tech corridor in Northern Virginia for a couple of years. Didn't like it very much. And then in my early 30s, I took a job as an English teacher, teaching English literature to, actually, I wound up a theater teacher, an English teacher, and a basketball coach. It was a great job. I got to talk about books, direct a play, and coach basketball all in the same day. It was pretty much as good as life was going to get. But over the time teaching, I sort of I got interested in writing again, and in my early 40s, I thought I was done. I would never go down this sucker rabbit hole again. That door was closed. And in private and without telling them, I started working on the short drop. Oh. And I kept it a secret. Like I just didn't tell anyone. When you write a book for a long time, people start teasing you about it. Like, how's it coming along? How's your book coming along? Oh, are you writing a book? And you could hear the air quotes around book. And I didn't have that. I didn't have a lot of air quotes in me. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this privately. No thoughts of publishing it whatsoever. I got about halfway through and I went, there might actually be something to this. So I showed it to a few friends who I knew would not BS me, who were cruel and heartless bastards. And I was like, would you keep reading this? Is this worth finishing? And they all said, yeah, we would finish it. It took me about 2.5 years, and I've been writing. I had a very fortunate sort of launch. I found an agent. I got a publishing deal, and I was able to quit my day job and write full time, and I have been ever since. So I like to say I'm an overnight success, 22 years in the making.
Yeah, I don't think there's such a thing as overnight success in this business, is there?
No, there's always. I know it always looks like it. I think that's one of the.
It came out of nowhere.
Yes, exactly. Or like, oh my God, yeah. Maybe there are in other professions, maybe in acting, maybe in music, but I think there's always a lot of hard work that you don't see. And so it always looks like, oh, well, they just wrote a book and now they're a big star. And that's just certainly not how publishing works.
Yeah. And so now, Constance, that's such an interesting concept. You're like really melding different kind of like genres, like it's in the future and it's a thriller and the whole cloning thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How you got the idea for that and what was the process like for Constance?
So a game I like to play with myself is take a very familiar conceit or genre and can I twist it? Can I make something new out of it? Something that I haven't seen before? And usually the answer to that is no, but it's a really useful mental exercise to go through. And sometimes I get good ideas. And one night I started noodling with the idea of like, wouldn't it be cool if someone had to investigate their own murder? All right. I haven't have I seen that before? And I could think of some ghost stories where you've seen that. I could think of some supernatural, a ghost needs their spirit to be put to rest and their murder to be solved. I've seen that, but I'd never seen someone actually, it's sort of paradoxical. How do you investigate your own murder? And I went to, I couldn't think of anything. I got into bed. I was lying in bed, and as I was falling asleep, it was about 12:30. I went, well, what if it was a clone? And I had one of those eureka moments. I did like a movie style sit up in bed, like, oh, if it's the clone, then, and the wheels started spinning. I got out of bed and I went to the computer, and I was up, all night writing an outline, starting to world build. And I wrote what eventually became chapter 4. It was originally chapter 1, but I wrote something that was very close to what chapter 4 is now. And I went, that's cool. And I very rarely think anything I've come up with is cool, but I was like, I think this is cool. But I was right in the middle of the second Gibson Vaughn book, and so I put it in a drawer, and I went, okay. And I would take it out periodically, and I would noodle with it and start to flesh it out, and it just kept growing. But it really just started from a very simple, like, I think it would be cool if someone had to investigate their own murder, and everything. It was kind of a back to front, like, develop, like, thought process. I sort of came up with the conceit and then had to come up with a way to justify it. Like, how do I justify this nonsense? And once I had the conceit, everything else sort of grew out of that.
Well, good thing you shut out of bed, because you would have gone back to sleep. You probably would have been gone.
And that is, for anyone listening, that is the best piece of writing advice I can give you is keep a notebook by your bed. If you have an idea as you're falling asleep, which is when I always have my ideas, and the number of times I've woken up in the morning like, oh, what was damn it, it's gone. So, if you think of something, write it down, because it will go away.
And I was looking at your when I was doing a little research for the interview. You put in a lot of research. You actually talked to what is it? I wrote it just down here. A neuropsychology expert at Johns Hopkins University. How do you find these people? And were they eager to talk to you? Were they like, writer?
No, I mean it's in my experience, it is two things. One, Washington D.C. is kind of an amazing resource. There are people, Johns Hopkins is just up the road. We have a thriving biotech corridor between DC and Maryland. We've got computers. And then we have an expert in almost every field, either, from a policy standpoint or so. One of my books I was doing, the Debris Line had a plot line about human trafficking. And I made a call, and I was like, do you know anyone who knows anything about human trafficking? And it's sort of like 2 degrees of separation. So, oh, I know a person who lobbies on human trafficking, and I'd be happy to put you in touch. And 9 times out of 10, you tell someone, hey, can I buy you a drink? I'm writing a thriller about your subject area. And people are usually really generous with their time. They love, people love to talk about what they know about, and oftentimes no one asks you. No one asks anyone, tell me what you know a lot about. Mm-hmm. Generally people want to talk about themselves, and or just talk about, oh, what movies have you seen? What sports have you seen? But to just say to someone, like, tell me about your area of expertise, this thing that you do and are passionate about all day. Generally, people sort of jump at it, and there are just a lot of experts near to where I live. So I've always been very, very lucky. And just with Constance, it was once I decided that I was going to do it, and I was going to do it. The book is set in the late 2030s, 2040. It was only sort of 20 years in the future. I was like, all right, I want to give this a grounding. And as I looked around, I think probably, human cloning is further away than I project in the book, but there are some pieces of the technology that Constance uses that are already happening. There are like the ability to scan the human brain. There are pieces of it that are further along than I had any idea that was happening. That was really interesting to sort of dig into and learn more about.
Oh yeah, that's scary. I didn't realize that for the actual human brains they're scanning, and
they are starting the process.
Wow.
Not to the degree that that they're able to do in Constance, but Constance sort of, I sort of cheat and say that there are certain breakthroughs that sort of jump the process. But you see, they are talking about the ability to store human consciousness. How to store human consciousness is now on the table, not in the near future, but we are definitely on. I think we are legitimately on that path.
And now, when you're doing all this research, when do you, how do you know, like, when it's time to stop? And is it hard to like go through it all? Do you end up with like a lot of research and what to put in and what to not put in into a book? I'm kind of curious about that process.
So, I think you do your research and then you want to put it all in because you've done all this work, and it's like world building. Science fiction authors and fantasy authors, we do all this. I mean, I guess I am now technically a science fiction author. You do all of this research and you try and build a world, a believable three-dimensional world that you can put the reader into, and they can feel, okay, like this is a real place. And your instinct, your desire, because you've done all this work, is to put it all in. But I think the truth of it is that less is more. That a lot like a theater play. Like if you look at a realistic stage from the audience, everything looks great. If you walk around behind it, it's just plywood. It's unpainted with some supports. And from the backside, a theater set doesn't look like very much. A movie set is the same way. Like when they build sets, like from the inside, it looks absolutely perfect. If you're standing on the other side of the wall, it's pretty flimsy. And I think that there's no point in painting and building the side of the wall that the audience / reader doesn't see. And the instinct to overdo it, you're going to wind up slowing down your story. You're going to wind up shortchanging the characters, which I think are the things that so in my philosophy of it is do the research so that and make it feel real to the reader, but only use as much of it as the reader needs to feel that environment, that world, the rules make sense. Like J.R. Tolkien, clever man, right? Mm-hmm. Probably no one ever did more world building than he did, but he was smart to do the Silmarillion separately. He said, okay, here's the Lord of the Rings, here's the Hobbit, and over here for the people who really want to know everything I got up to, here's how you read Elvish. Here's how you read Elvish. Here are the kings going back 600 years. Here's all of that stuff that you don't need in the book, but that you can feel. I think the reader can feel all of that work that Tolkien put into it without actually having it all on the page.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I saw that David Baldacci has a masterclass, and that masterclass.com, and he showed us a binder, like it was huge, of all his research, and he said it'll only being about a paragraph in the book. I was like, wow.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, it's like, not to name names, but if you start to think about some of the really, as writers get more powerful, without naming names, next time you're in a bookstore, look at some of the big and most famous fantasy science fiction series out there. And what you'll see is that the first book or two are pretty slim. And that they start to get longer. And they start to get longer. And by the 5th, 6th, 7th book, they're these massive books because now the author can do whatever they want. And no one can tell them no. And so all of their research winds up in the book. And the reader complaint is like, where'd the story go? Like, you're just stopping to tell me 40 pages about the background of this world, and you're getting away from the story. And I would have wanted to say to that, that yes, you are selling millions of copies of your books, but you still need an editor. You need someone to rein in that impulse to use. Like Baldacci is very, very smart. Like he is as big as anyone out there, but he never lost sight of that lesson. It was like, do your research and then just use a paragraph of it. That's a great analogy. I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah. And what's your process like? Do you like, when you're writing a book, do you like, do you write every day? Do you have like word count goals? I'm just kind of curious about your writing process.
It has evolved over the years. At the end of every book, I do like a after action report, and I've asked myself like, what went well with the writing of that book? What went badly? What can I improve? And one of the things that lately I've come to realize is that I never take days off, and that I don't take weekends off. That I really hadn't taken a vacation in years, and that sort of like pressure, that self like guilt, like why aren't you working? Why aren't you working? Was leading to less and less productivity. So on this book, I am purposely giving myself the weekends off. I am not working on the weekends. And some days I do not, some weeks I don't actually do that, but that's the rule. And it is, so I work Monday to Friday. I write, from about 6 a.m. till noon, try and get some exercise, have lunch, get some exercise. I take a nap because I love naps more than life itself. And my brain is just tired at that point. And then I get up and I will work on other things in the late afternoon, and then start the process over again. And that has shrunk. Like it used to be, I would work from the moment I got up until, I just dropped at like 5 or 6. And again, over time, I've just learned that it is, while it feels like a responsible way to work, it was actually like the returns were diminishing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So,
I can imagine that you start getting burned out probably then if you're like doing it every day or.
I think it's a real problem.
Yeah.
You just, I really love what I do, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to do it. And knowing when to step away, when to decompress is incredibly important. And I think it's something that Americans were really bad at.
Yeah.
Culturally, we are driven to, it's one of those interesting things. In America, one of the first questions anyone asks anyone is, "What do you do?" In France, that's not a question that comes up. I guess it's culturally very different. Like that's not the thing that they find most interesting about you. I'm trying to be a little bit more French for not very good at it, but trying to learn something from the French.
Yeah, I thought when I was looking for I was hiring a freelancer for something, and they were in Eastern Europe, and they were like, "Oh yeah, well we're shutting down from I can't remember what it was, but basically it was like from like December 5th to like January 30th or something." Like, yeah, we're all shut down. We'll be back after that. And I'm like, wow, like a month and a half.
Yeah. In France, like July and August, just nothing's getting done. Like everyone's on their summer vacation, everyone's gone. And it's so antithetical to, like, Americans just can't wrap their minds around it. Like,
Yeah.
What do you mean you get more than 6 days off a year? I don't even understand what you're talking about.
And are you still working on the Gibson Vaughn series? Is it going to be more of those books or?
Not. I am right now. I'm working with a fellow in Los Angeles trying to develop a framework for a possible Gibson Vaughn television series, which has been a lot of fun. It's not something I've done before, and he's very experienced with it. It's been a really good learning experience. Like that what works for books doesn't necessarily work for TV, and vice versa, and learning how to adapt. That adapting is not merely taking, all right, well, here are the words on the page, throw it on the screenplay page, and you're done. Like it's a much more, there are things that television does well and film does well that books don't do well, and vice versa. And so that has been an incredibly valuable learning experience. As for writing more Gibson Vaughn books, I don't see at the moment. The series felt after Origami Man, it felt like it had come to sort of a natural conclusion. But then I had another idea. Like, oh, well, maybe. So we'll have to see. I think it was largely sort of like pulling the books out and looking at them again for the work on this television idea that I was like, oh, I miss these guys. Like they were really fun to write and to think about and to live with. And so again, we'll just have to see what comes.
And Constance, that comes out on September 1st, right? I believe. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
September the 1st.
Yeah. And so we've talked about the cloning and the solving the murder, but can you tell us a little bit about the actual story, like a little, what readers can expect when they're reading that, one of your books, if they're not familiar with your work?
So my work has often been described as character driven, which I can't decide whether I like that or I don't know exactly what character driven means, because I think to some extent, I can't think of a story that's not character driven. But I think what they mean by that is that the characters have life to them and are, let me rephrase it. What I hope they mean is that you would want to know something about these characters even if something terrible wasn't happening to them. I mean, that's the thing about being a thriller writer, is that you write these characters and then you are incredibly sadistic to them. You do things to them that you wouldn't do to your worst enemy. You're like, all right, how can I make your life a living hell for the next 300 pages? Where you're not really going to be happy for one blessed minute of it. And that's basically what writing a thriller is like, or writing any sort of, there aren't very many books written about just happy people leading happy lives. It's almost always like John was happy, and then the asshole thriller writer showed up and framed him for murder. And good luck to you, John. I hope you can get yourself out of that one. And so the book is about a young woman. She's 24. Her name is Constance Darcy. She's from West Texas, and she was a musician who winds up in Washington, D.C., where a company named Paleogenesis has developed commercial cloning, which is essentially they offer a life insurance policy. So the premise of the book is that Paleogenesis will, for a exorbitant fee, sort of a fee that really is only affordable to the 1%, upload your consciousness and store it, and create a clone backup of your body. And in the event that tragedy befalls and you are killed, Paleogenesis will be notified immediately and will download your stored consciousness into your stored clone, activate the clone, and you will go on. Your life will not be ended by this tragic event. And the big problem they found with it is that that is memory gap, and that clones really struggle if they have a lot of what the company calls lag, which is the gap between the last time your consciousness was uploaded and the moment that you die. And that the longer that period goes on, the more the clone feels like an imposter or a fake. They don't remember 3 days or a week or 3 weeks. And that the bigger that space gets, the more conflicted and the more struggle they have. And also it leaves a very convenient blank spot. So when my hero dies unexpectedly and her clone is activated, she doesn't know what happened to her. She doesn't know why her original died or what was going on. And so she has to set out on this exploration to find out who she's become in the interim, what happened to her, and hopefully solve this mystery. So it's the idea that I had at the beginning, that is still the thing that I'm excited, is that she is both victim and the detective. She is thrust into both roles and has to play both parts. And that is, I think that is that's what I really just loved about the idea. I'm very excited to sort of put out in the world and see how people respond to it.
Yeah, it's been awesome because such a cool idea. Kind of reminded me of that movie where it starts with the guy was poisoned and he's trying to figure out who poisoned him.
DOA,
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's just it's kind of hard to put down because you want to see, like she's trying to figure out, and we're reading it at the same time. So yeah, it's been a great book to read. So so I can see why I kept you up at night when I shot out of bed. Yeah. And were you a fan of thrillers and science fiction as a reader before you started to write your own books?
I didn't. True confession, I had not actually read a lot of thrillers prior to it. I had read some fantasy. I dabble. I sort of jump around a lot. I would say that prior to, I was an English teacher. I was a snobby English literature teacher. So my taste in books ran more towards what I think is sort of foolishly called literary fiction, dismissively. I think all books are literature. I think I think I have had an education on that subject. I'd always liked Raymond Chandler. I'd liked James Cain, a lot of the Black Lizard, Jim Thompson. I really liked that sort of spare noir 50s, just great hard-boiled American stuff. My parents are huge mystery thriller readers. So when I decided I would write one, I went over to their house and just started stealing 5 or 6 books at a time and reading them, devouring them really. So I have been making up for lost time, but I am not, I go to mystery thriller conferences and I'm always put to shame by some of my peers who are so much better versed and more widely read on within the genre than I am. So it's been nice. It's been a nice discovering how much I like these books and these writers.
Yeah, those are great. The Black Lizard ones. I bought a anthology of that once, like a few years ago. It's really thick. It's like all those pulp writers from the magazines from the 50s, or I think maybe even older. Those are awesome to read. They're all like little short stories.
It was like someone took, it was that generation of American writers that were all sort of imitating Hemingway to one degree or another, and they're like, all right, well, let's take what Hemingway does and we will translate it to crime fiction. And the results were, like that sort of like very spare, not a lot of adjectives, not a lot of adverbs, not a lot of flowery prose, just very declarative short sentences. And then the results were very, very cool.
And now that with you have this conferences coming out now, are you doing like the book tours and conferences? Are they coming back now after the pandemic? Well, we're still in the pandemic, but is it getting better?
I think that's going to be interesting. I am going to BoucherCon at the end of August, although I know a number of writers who I already know are holding off still. I think most of the book tour, if you want to call it that, will be virtual still. I just don't think we're quite back there. I think if we continue the way we are, I think books that come out at the end of the year might be more liable to do that. Although I see online, I see authors who are back in and doing it. So I think it's just everyone's individual comfort level. And I think the decision was made that it's just better to err on the side of caution at this point.
Yeah, especially now they got all the different variants that are coming up and stuff. So yeah, it's still a little freaky out there.
They all sound like Michael Crichton novels. The Omega variant, the Theta variant, the Lambada. It's like, okay, all right. Although I joke, it's the last year and a half.
Yeah.
If I had written half of this stuff into the plot of a book, I'd get laughed out of a room.
Yeah.
There's so many strange things that have happened that like you just couldn't get away within a book.
Yeah.
Coincidences and behavior that you're like, nah, no one could. No, that's not believable. That wouldn't happen. I'm like, but it's in the newspaper. It's not even a book. It's like this. But it's interesting. The burden for realism in a book is much higher than the burden for realism in reality. You can get away with things in real life that you just can't get away with in a book. People are just not going to buy for a second, even if they'd read in the newspaper the day before and I had straight up stolen it.
Yeah, they put the book down. There's no way somebody would want to bring down an airplane because they have to wear a mask. No way. You read it in the newspaper.
I saw a newspaper story last week where a woman led the Florida State Police on a high-speed chase, and they caught her because she stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru for drive-thru, and that's how they caught her. Like she was like getting away, and she was like, "What I need is a Happy Meal right now," and that's where the police found her. And if I put that in a book, if I said my hero was like getting away, and the police couldn't catch him in there, and he's like, "You know what? I really need a Whopper." And now he's in jail. The reader would throw that book across the room. And that is just, this person has no idea how to write a book. And that's one of the frustrating things about it is that you get an idea or something that quite feasibly happened, but you just can't. You can't take your hero. You can't take your hero to McDonald's. Not during a high-speed chase.
And what do you think you're going to do with the pandemic in future books? Do you think you're going to address it or ignore it? I've been asking this for my guests, and most are saying they're going to ignore it because we all got COVID fatigue. It's kind of curious what your take is on it.
I had an idea for a book about it, and I pitched it to my publisher, and they were like, "Nope." Like, but it's a good idea. Like, oh, it's a good idea, but no. Thank you very much. What else you got? And I was like, okay. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. It's always interesting how books and art, one of the things you can always say is if you want to tell what scares Americans, look at their horror movies. If you look at the 1950s, it's all stuff, during Sputnik and the Cold War, it's all aliens and irradiated monsters. Mm-hmm. It's Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, or it's The Blob, or The Thing, or stuff coming down, or Invasion, the original 1958 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And as you go through the decades, post-Vietnam, you see the rise of all of a sudden the monsters are people. It's the rise of the slasher film. All of a sudden, the monsters are no longer, tentacled. They're just men with hockey masks chasing after people, cutting them up. And I think there's always that there's a reflection in the culture and in the art of what's scaring us, or what's on our mind, or what's causing us anxiety. One of the golden eras of paranoid political thrillers is post-Watergate. All of those great, Robert Ludlum books, The Bourne Identity, they're all the big political conspiracy, 6 Days of the Condor. Those are all a response to Watergate and the Pentagon Papers and sort of mistrust of the government. What's interesting is so far I haven't really seen that. To your question, it's a really interesting one. Like how will art and entertainment respond to, the period that we're been through and continuing to live through? Will there be a direct response? Will we start to see horror films that address it? Will zombie fiction start to build in some of the things we've learned from how we've responded to COVID? I don't know, or will we all just be like, no, we have fatigue, and give me a nice shiny Marvel movie where the concerns are where I don't have to think about it. And I think that's going to be I'm very curious to watch and see how that all plays out in the next couple of years.
So let's see, you're working on the television work that you were doing? Are you just getting ready to write another book as well, or what's up next?
I am actually writing a companion piece to Constance. It's not a direct sequel. It takes place in the same world. Originally, Constance was supposed to be a standalone book. That was going to be the end of it. And my publisher came to me and said, "We think we'd like another one." And I went, "Well, that's great. I don't have another one." And then a day or two later, I was taking a shower, the other place I do my best thinking. And I had a fully formed idea for a second book. And I called them up. I was like, "Okay, I got one." I said, "What are you talking about? You just said you didn't have one." I was like, "Well, I took a shower and I solved the problem." And they're okay. And so I'm about at the midway point of a second one. It's called Chance. It follows another character experiencing their own clone dilemma. And I'm kind of optimistic about it. I quite like it a lot. I think it surprised me. I didn't think I wanted to write another book in the world, but this one is I'm really excited about it. And looking forward to seeing how it turns out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Thomas and Mercer, that's your publisher, right? I mean, I keep reading all these books from their authors, and they seem to really be doing a good job at getting a great books like that out. Do you enjoy working with them? And
they have been terrific. The woman who runs it is a woman named Grace Doyle, who is just been a terrific ally and friend. And she was not my acquiring editor. The man who bought the book, who bought Short Drop, left the company right after Short Drop was released, and Grace replaced him. But she's done an amazing job building it up, and it's become a really interesting home. They have this interesting cross section of sort of undiscovered authors, but they've also, they're doing they've signed up some big heavy. They're doing some work with Dean Koontz.
Yeah.
They've signed. I want to say Patricia Cornwall, but I might have just pulled that name out of my backside. And I really just love what they're doing. They've been incredibly supportive. I mean, oftentimes I think when an author comes along, it's like, well, I've been writing a straight sort of thriller, and now I want to do a science fiction novel. The reaction is, no, stay in your lane, do the one thing. Like, we're doing well with this, just keep doing it. When I came to them with the idea for Constance, I was really ready for some from someone else, yes, but from you, give us another Gibson Vaughn, whatnot. And they saw it and they understood it, and they really put a lot of it. They've been hugely supportive of it in the lead up to the launch, and I couldn't be happier with what they've done for the book.
That's great. Yeah, and that again comes September 1st. Where's a good place for listeners to find you? I'm assuming your website. You have great information on your website.
Yes, I am www.matthewfitzsimmons.com. It's a very, very clever title. I'm also on, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I do not have a TikTok channel because I'm just not that clever. I feel like that. I don't know any authors who are on TikTok. I feel like that is not an author-friendly platform, or not friendly, but I don't think that TikTok is necessarily. We're not necessarily the most photogenic group of professionals in the world.
I still can't wrap my head around TikTok yet either. I'm too old, I guess.
Right, exactly. I feel like there's that sort of I've seen TikTok videos and they're very clever and they're great. I'm like, but I'm going to leave that to the young, the young visionaries. I'm going to stick to 160 words and the odd photograph on Instagram, and that's about as daring as I'm going to get with it.
And so before I let you go, I was my last question I like to ask is, because I have aspiring writers that listen to the podcast. Any advice? Especially, I love yours because you stopped and you started up again. Any advice for aspiring writers?
So the advice that, when I taught English for 12 years. And, the curriculum changed over time and evolved, but there were certain books that I taught for 6 or 7 years at a time. And as an English teacher, you wind up, you read them, when you're getting ready for the year, you would reread it. Even if you'd read it before, you reread it. And then as you're doing it in the class, you sort of reread again the night before. So, before I start a book, I would read it. And then as we were reading it, or I'd read the next 2 chapters, I would read along with them that night. So it was very, very fresh in my mind. And what that led to was there were certain books that I had probably read 50 or 60 times over the course of 12 years. And I think one of the pieces of advice and it's a correct piece of advice, which is to read a lot. Like, read a lot, read broadly, read everything you can get your hands on. And I think that's absolutely true. But I think one of the things that we don't do is reread. And it was invaluable to me. If you have an album that you love, what's your favorite album? Like, what's your favorite album?
Oh, mine?
Yeah, what's your favorite album?
I don't know. I have to think about it. I'm more of a heavy metal kind of guy. So like the old Deep Purple of the 70s just popped in my head.
Okay, so old Deep Purple. So what's the best Deep Purple album in your opinion?
I can't remember the title, the concert one, the double one with Smoke on the Water.
Double one?
Yeah.
How many times have you listened to that?
Lots of times. I still have the old record. It's all scratched up.
Exactly. So so we listen to our favorite music hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times.
Yeah,
we know those songs note for note. But our favorite books, we read once, maybe twice, and then we move on. And I think so my advice is, if you come across a book that really speaks to you, read it again, and then again, because that author probably spent years working on that book, and you didn't get it. You didn't get everything they did. You didn't see, the same way that you hear new things when you listen to your favorite song for the 100th time, and you don't really start to see what they're doing. I think the same thing is true for books, is the value and the education in really seeing how, as you start to pull a great paragraph or a great chapter apart, that you're like, oh, I wish I could do something like that. Stop and figure out how they did it. And I mean, I don't think I would be writing today if I had not been an English teacher. I learned so much from that process. So that's my big piece of advice is read narrowly.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, because I've had so many books, and books I usually just get rid of them. But records, I still have records from when I was 15. It's so weird that it's such a good point.
There's a built-in problem there, is that, like, you can listen to your favorite album while you're doing something else.
Yeah, that's true.
You can listen to your favorite album in 30 minutes. The longest albums are sort of 30 to 60 minutes long. That's about as long as it's going to get. A book is more of a commitment, and some people read faster and some people read slower. So there is a sense of like, well, life is short. I need to read a new book. Like, I've already read that one. So I think the investment of, like, I'm not saying reread everything, but I'm just saying, if you find certain books that are like, this is my style, this is my, this is a person I would want to emulate and learn from, the investment is worth it. And it was for me.
All right, Matthew. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed talking to you. And as mentioned, Constance will be out September 1st. And so people should go check it out. It's a great read.
Thank you, Alan. I really, really enjoyed being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers. Or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also, please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.